So, you may have heard of the American Gilded Age, but I won't assume that you're a history nerd like me. This was the era shortly after the Civil War. Its name was coined later by Mark Twain, and it was satirical. This was a time of technological and economic growth, lightly covering over major political corruption and extreme, unprecedented poverty. Railroads, factories, coal mines, all full of underpaid and overworked laborers. Adults and children both worked endless hours in dangerous conditions. We often think of second wave feminism as giving the right to work to women, but many poor women, Black women, Irish immigrant women, etc., a lot of women worked in this era. Black folks had been freed, but they were still under serious oppression in the South, and many fled north. Immigrants flooded in as well from all over the world. There was a rapid shift, as we mentioned earlier, from farm culture to factory culture. So people moved from rural to urban settings, increasing the workforce, as well as the poor in completely unprepared cities. Slums sprang up, diseases spread. A lot of people suffered a great deal. Christianity around that time had been largely concerned with personal, individual salvation. But many Christians lived through or witnessed these hellish conditions, and they began to take different parts of Scripture seriously. Prophets of the Hebrew Bible, like Micah, who said, "Do justice, love kindness, and go humbly with God." Amos, who said, "Let justice roll down like waters, and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream." These prophets demanded that their people stop hoarding wealth and ignoring the poor, and instead realign themselves with their God's instructions. The Christians in the late 19th century saw the same problems. In addition to the prophets, they particularly treasured the teachings of Jesus in the New Testament. Love your neighbor as yourself. God's kingdom come, his will be done on earth as it is in heaven. They began to use these instructions as the spiritual rationale for why the church and its members needed to be just as concerned with social well-being as with individual spiritual life. These folks began creating schools, labor unions, and settlement houses for immigrants and the poor. They founded clinics, which became hospitals, which is why so many today are called Methodist this or Saint that. They just did these things. They didn't wait for anyone else to do it because there wasn't anyone else. Just corrupt politicians, heartless industrialists, and the suffering poor. That sounds pretty familiar to me. A Unitarian minister named Francis Greenwood Peabody taught at Harvard Divinity School and began teaching some of the first social ethics courses in the United States. He attempted to spiritualize social concerns and socialize religious life. A Universalist named Dr. Frank Oliver Hall preached to the Universalist General Convention that, quote, "The abject poverty of the many and the immeasurable wealth of the few is a disgrace, not to the rich or the poverty-stricken individual, but to all of us who consent that such an unjust order should continue," end quote. Hall became the chair of the Universalist Social Service Commission, and the commission's secretary, Clarence Skinner, for whom the UU publishing organization Skinner House is named, presented a declaration of social principles and social programs in the wake of World War I. In this, it was written that we should no longer judge each other, but remove the stumbling blocks from each other's paths. It demanded that women be able to vote, that the nation be of lesser importance than the world as a whole, and that the religious community's primary goal should be the reformation of civilization around justice, peace, and ethics, so that the spiritual life of each individual can flourish to its fullest capacity. In addition to these abstracts, the Universal Declaration of Social Principles laid out concrete solutions. Education of social consciousness, guaranteed housing, education, and food for every child, a universal standard of living, public ownership of industry and land, elimination of extreme private wealth, protected freedom of speech limited only by respect for each other, mobilization of churches towards not just charity, but systemic correction of social problems like disease, ignorance, crime, and poverty, as well as working towards ending war and establishing peace. Around this same time, the Catholic activist Dorothy Day said, quote, "What we would like to do is change the world, make it a little simpler for people to feed, clothe, and shelter themselves as God intended them to do. And by fighting for better conditions, by crying out unceasingly for the rights of the workers, the poor, and the destitute, we can, to a certain extent, change the world. We can work for the oasis, the little cell of joy and peace in a harried world. We can throw our pebble in the pond and be confident that its ever-widening circle will reach around the world. We repeat, there is nothing we can do but love. And dear God, please enlarge our hearts to love each other, to love our neighbor, and to love our enemy as our friend." End quote. The foundational reasoning for the Social Gospel-ers' changes was brought back again and again to God's love for humanity and the world. The capital L love, that force in the universe which connects everything, including the poorest, the sickest, the smallest among us. When we become aware of that all-pervading love, we cannot turn away from suffering in our community. We cannot be satisfied while we know so many are struggling around the world, often for the sake of our comfort and convenience. Our spirits whisper inside us that something isn't right, and that each of us has a role to play to make it so. In addition to that big cosmic spiritual love, the Social Gospel-ers had a clear and shared vision. They were Christian, and so they framed it as the kingdom of heaven on earth. They talked about what their vision of paradise could be, not just what the hell around them was. What if, they asked, what if it didn't have to be like this? What if we could make our world a place like heaven, where no human being is reduced to their production value or stereotyped by their race, where each person's body is respected as sacrosanct, never violated or legislated out of their control, where curable diseases are cured, whether or not you can pay for it, where women can fulfill our dreams of creativity and achievement and be parents without sacrifice, where men can feel and express their emotions without shame or retribution, where queer and trans folks can freely express infinite forms of beauty, from the flannel to the fashionista, where any person can be themselves, be treasured, have friends and families, where kids are cherished by the whole community, so parents aren't left struggling alone, where those kids can be curious, wild, joyous, and sensitive in peace, where they can learn what they want and need to know in the way that works best for each of them, where, wild idea, there are no weapons of war anywhere near them. Wildest of dreams, maybe where there are no weapons of war at all. A heaven, a world where no one ever goes hungry, where no one has to live without a house unless they want to, where we feel as comfortable in the natural world as we do in our homes because we've remembered our ancestral wisdom, where we know the names of the plants, the animals, and the rivers that our lives depend on and who depend on us in turn. A heavenly world where we awake to the paradise in which we have been born, where together we maintain that paradise for everyone. So what are the problems of our day? They're unsurprisingly quite similar to those of our ancestors. Like our ancestors, we each have a question to answer. What does your spirituality, your understanding of the world and your place in it, suggest that you do about these problems? They are far too big for any of us alone, so the first step is to start talking about it together. What is our shared vision of paradise? And what needs to happen to bring it to earth? No more gilded ages, with wealth for some and poverty for many. Let us do as our Unitarian and Universalist ancestors did, work to bring about a social golden age for all. May it be so. May we make it so.